Good afternoon. In a short while, we will be joined by our friend Cesar Nunez, who is the director of the UNAIDS office here in New York. He will join us to discuss the launch of a new UNAIDS report entitled The Urgency of Now, AIDS at a Crossroad 2024 Global AIDS Update. I also want to update you on our Deputy Secretary General, who's in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Earlier today, she spoke at the opening of the first session of the Preparatory Committee for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. That conference aims to take stock of the progress made since the adoption of the Addis Ababa Agenda. Ms. Mohammed highlighted 6 areas of action: the need to tackle debt, enhance access to financing, close the gaps in the global financial safety net, establish a fair and effective international tax system, rethink blended finance, and address global economic governance reform. She added that next year's conference in Spain would be a unique opportunity to accelerate action, and she highlighted the need to lay the groundwork in Addis Ababa. The Secretary General also addressed the conference via video message. He noted that 9 years ago, world leaders met in Addis Ababa and agreed on a transformative agenda, committing public and private actors to align investment and policies with sustainable development. Yet despite the progress, he said, we must face the facts. Many commitments remain unfulfilled. His video's message is available online. Throughout her visit to Ethiopia, Amina Mohammed held a number of bilateral meetings with senior government officials, including the President of Ethiopia, Sahle-Work Zewde, the Prime Minister, Abiy Mohammed, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Taye Atske Selassie, and meetings focused on the UN-Ethiopia cooperation, SDG acceleration, as well as financing for development. She also met today with Spain's Secretary of State for Foreign and Global Affairs, Diego Martinez Bello, to discuss the SDG Stimulus Leaders Group and the preparation for the upcoming conference in Spain. Tomorrow, she will deliver remarks at a high-level women's leadership dialogue convened by the Ministry of Women and Social Affairs of Ethiopia before heading off to Burkina Faso. And on a related note, the Secretary General, with the host government's approval, has appointed Carol Flore Smerzniak of Mauritius as our new resident and humanitarian coordinator for Burkina Faso. She brings more than 20 years of experience in development, security, humanitarian, and conflict and post-conflict settings. She worked recently as UNDP's resident representative in Côte d'Ivoire. She's had a number of other postings, and we congratulate her on this new post. Turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says it has received initial reports that families in Gaza are starting to flee towards Deir el-Balah and western Khan Yunis following today's evacuation order issued by the Israeli military. Both areas are already heavily overcrowded with limited services and shelter spaces available. Today's evacuation directive includes areas located in the eastern part of what had been designated by the Israeli military as a so-called humanitarian zone. Our OCHA colleagues say that frequent evacuation directives and relentless hostilities are further devastating Gaza's health system, making it increasingly difficult for people who have been repeatedly displaced to access essential services. The Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis has issued a new call for people to donate blood, with reports that the facilities has received dozens of casualties today alone. Meanwhile, OCHA warns that humanitarian workers in Gaza continue to face enormous risk, including to their personal safety. As you may have seen yesterday, a convoy from our UNRWA colleagues were shot at by Israeli forces as they were heading north to Gaza City. Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, said there were no casualties, but UNRWA's teams had to duck and take cover, noting that they had been traveling in clearly marked UN armored vehicles and were wearing UN vests. Philippe Lazzarini said one vehicle was severely damaged while waiting just ahead of the IDF's checkpoint south of Wadi Gaza. He said the convoy's movement had been coordinated with the Israeli authorities and that those responsible for yesterday's account must be held to account. Meanwhile, our humanitarian partners tell us that people in Gaza continue to face severe water shortages. Between the 8th and the 21st of this month, the daily average water supply was about 90,000 cubic meters. That's about a quarter of the amount produced prior to October of last year. Damage to infrastructure, the lack of electricity, and shortages of fuel, spare parts, and chlorine continue to hamper water productions and purification, as well as sewage pumping. And turning to the West Bank, UNICEF reported today that on average, one Palestinian child has been killed every 2 days in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and that is since October of last year. UNICEF says 143 Palestinian children have been killed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, since October, a spike of nearly 250% compared to the preceding 9 months. And you will have seen over the weekend, we issued a note expressing the Secretary General's concern about reported airstrikes in and around the port of Hodeidah in Yemen. Israel, as you saw, claimed responsibility for the airstrikes, noting this was in response to previous Houthi attacks on Israel and Tel Aviv. The Secretary General calls on all concerned to avoid attacks that could harm civilians and damage civilian infrastructure. He remains deeply concerned about the risk of further escalation in the region and continues to urge all to exercise utmost restraint. As you will see this afternoon, the Secretary General the Security Council will be meeting on the situation in Hodeidah, the situation over the last 2 days. Briefing will be Rosemary DiCarlo, the head of the Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, and also briefing will be General Berry, the head of our mission in Hodeidah. And tomorrow, just to stay on Yemen, Hans Grunberg, the special envoy for Yemen, will be at the Security Council. He'll be here in person, and he will speak to you at the stakeout afterwards. And speaking of Security Council, Geir Pedersen told Security Council members today that a Syrian-led and owned effort cannot succeed without cooperative international diplomacy among key stakeholders in the UN-facilitated political process, emphasizing that this is the path described in Security Council Resolution 2254, which calls for political settlements to the conflict in Syria. For his part, Ramesh Rajasingham, the Director of Coordination at OCHA, briefed on the humanitarian situation. Across Syria, he said over 16 million people need humanitarian assistance, adding that the border crossings have been instrumental in enabling critical assistance and protection services to more than 1 million vulnerable people every month. And given the scale of needs, it also remains critical to continue efforts to scale up those assistance. Turning to Ukraine, our colleagues at OCHA, the Humanitarian Affairs Department, tell us that today and over the weekend, hostilities in the frontline regions of eastern and southern Ukraine killed at least 7 people. That's what local authorities are telling us. They've reported nearly 80 civilian casualties in total. Over 200 homes and civilian infrastructure were damaged, including power lines, gas pipelines, education facilities, and ambulances. Our humanitarian colleagues note that attacks on energy infrastructure continue to disrupt power and water supplies in several parts of Ukraine, including in Chernihiv, Poltava, and the Sumy regions. The UN Human Rights Office also has documented more than 70 such attacks in April and May alone. Our humanitarian colleagues also tell us that aid workers continue to provide emergency support after an attack on the residential areas of Mykolaiv city on Friday. Complementing efforts of the first responders, aid workers provided psychological support, distributed shelter materials to help repair damaged homes, and also provided hot meals to those who needed it. Finally, the Food and Agriculture Organization today released its World Forest Reports, which says that forests face increasing climate-related stress amid growing demand for their products. The report also warns that climate change is making our forests more vulnerable to stressors such as wildfires and pests. Global wood production, meanwhile, remains at record levels, with projections that demand for round wood could increase as much as 49% between 2020 and 2050. The report emphasizes the role of innovation in achieving sustainable future for the forestry sector. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. Does the Secretary General have any comment on President Biden withdrawing from the race for president in 2024?
No.
Okay. Secondly,
No, because we don't want to involve ourselves in the electoral process in this country, and I feel enough people have probably commented on it.
Bangladesh.
Yes.
Does the Secretary General have any comment on the latest violence and also on the sentencing of Bangladeshis in the United Arab Emirates for protesting in support of the young people in Bangladesh?
Sure, a couple of things. The Secretary General remains very deeply concerned about the violence that we've seen in Bangladesh, which more than 100 people have been killed and thousands more injured. We've seen also that yesterday the Supreme Court of Bangladesh decision on the quotas for the civil service jobs, which was at the part of the issues regarding the protests. He also saw the decision by the Bangladeshi student groups to suspend protests for 48 hours. He very much hopes that both these decisions will help create a conducive environment for dialogue. He urges all sides to avoid violence and negotiate in good faith with a view towards resolving all existing disagreements. Also want to add that we urge the authorities to ensure the protection and safety of all protesters and to create an environment where the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly can be freely exercised, and he calls for all acts of violence to be investigated promptly, transparently, and impartially, and for those responsible held to account. The one thing I do want to add, because we've seen, our colleagues on the ground in Bangladesh have seen reports of disturbing reports of UN-marked vehicles that may have been used during the developments we've seen in Bangladesh over the last few days. It's important for us to stress that UN troop and police contributing countries are to use UN insignia and equipment marked with this insignia only when they are performing mandated tasks as part of a UN peacekeeping or UN political mission, and within the context of the deployment of any UN mission. Our serious concern in this regard has been conveyed to the relevant authorities in Bangladesh by our colleagues.
And the sentencing.
Oh yes, I think we've seen the disturbing reports of very harsh sentences being meted out. As we do everywhere else, we feel that it is very important for people to have the right to express themselves freely and peacefully without fear of arrest or worse. Gabriel, and then Sally.
Thank you, Steph. Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C. this week. Is there any conversations or any plans for the Secretary General to converse with him at all, either in person or on the phone?
I'm not aware of any plans for the Prime Minister to come up here to New York. If he did, as always, the Secretary General's door is always open, and I'm not aware of any phone calls. I mean, you know the status of the phone call. I don't have to rehash that.
Okay, and going back to the, I'll call it an incident that you were talking about, that Felipe Lazzarini spoke about, or that put a message on social media about. 5 bullets in a marked UN vehicle on a coordinated route that the Israelis knew about. Sounds awfully targeted, and sounds awfully targeted in my view.
It's extremely worrying. I mean, we have seen already an unprecedented number of UN colleagues being killed in this operation. We have seen what happened to the World Central Kitchen. we need to get to the bottom of this. And this also comes within the context of some very harsh words by a number of Israeli officials regarding UNRWA.
What more do you think the Secretary General or the UN in general can do? I mean, this has been going on for months now.
Well, as always, wherever we operate under the protection of the authorities of where we work, right? We are not, the UN in Gaza is not armed. We do not have armed security with us. It is incumbent on all the parties in this conflict to ensure the protection of UN and all humanitarian workers. Madame.
Steph, going back to Syria, will one day Assad be brought in front of the justice? Because nobody talks about him anymore and all the crimes he has committed.
Well, as in any conflict, there will come a day for accountability for all those involved. Let's go to all the hands on screens. Let's go to Deji, Abdelhamid, and then Mushfiq.
Hi, Steph. Sorry, cannot be there in person. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so a couple of questions. First, a follow-up. You just mentioned what Mr. Lazzarini said about the situation of the convoy. Just want to know, will there be any impact for the future scheduled convoy in Gaza?
Look, I can't speak to the operational details, but I can tell you that as you have witnessed through the briefings here, humanitarian colleagues, whether UN or non-UN, have continuously put themselves in harm's way to try to help the civilians of Gaza. And
So
our operations will continue.
Okay. Second, it's a different topic. Olympics. We know that Olympics is coming in days. Has the UN confirmed who will be attending the opening ceremony?
We will have an official announcement on this tomorrow, which will not surprise you.
Okay, and no, I haven't finished this question yet. Sorry, but we know that it's coming in just days. But technically speaking, there's a tradition of truce during Olympics. But we know that there are conflicts going on in the world. What message does the Secretary General have for those nations which are still in conflicts, especially in such a time where the Olympic, when people should, to obey, not obey, but to pay their, to really respect the tradition of truce.
Well, we very much hope that throughout the world we will see respect for the Olympic truce. That is our message. Abdelhamid, then Mushfiq.
Thank you, Stéphane. On the statement of the Secretary General on the attack on Yemen, he only expressed his concern. On his statement about the Houthi attack on Israel, he condemned it forcefully. Why is there one case he condemns and the other case he just expresses concern when there is at least, I think, 8 people were killed and 80 were wounded and the infrastructure was completely destroyed?
I think the answer to your question is contained in the text of both statements. Your next question.
My next question about Syria. In his statement, Geir Pedersen mentioned so many incidents that Israel attacked Syria. I'm still waiting for one day to see a strong statement from the SG condemning Israeli violation of Syria's sovereignty and attacking civilian targets in Damascus or in Aleppo.
Well, Mr. Pedersen speaks on behalf of the Secretary General, and I think we have spoken on that issue quite a bit. Mushfiq, go ahead.
Last question.
Go ahead.
Mohammed Jasser is a journalist. He was targeted in his home in Jabalia, killing him and killing his wife and his 2 children on Saturday. by an Israeli air raid. He's number 161 Palestinian journalist in Gaza. I haven't seen any comment on the assassination or killing of Mohammed Jasser.
I had not seen that case. I will look into it and revert back to you. Mushfiq.
Thank you, Stéphane. Thank you. My colleague Adi already asked the question that you answered. My simple question is, are you relying on the current regime to resolve the issues, those who are not hesitating to killing innocent peoples, and death toll crossed hundreds, nobody knows, internet shut down, and the situation is the massive crackdown and using, as you say, APC vehicle. So an international community, international rights organization, including Nobel laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus, urged the UN and the international community to act promptly to rescue the Bangladeshi people and their rights.
They will be, I think we have been very forceful in expressing the Secretary General opinion. As always, there will need to be accountability. We very much hope that whether it's the government or the side of the students, use this, the time given, the space in a sense created by the Supreme Court decision, by the decision of the students not to demonstrate for 48 hours, to engage in a dialogue and to create an environment that is conducive to such a dialogue. But we will continue to monitor the situation very closely. Thank you. Unless I hear any other questions, I will go to our guests, who I will ask to come up to the podium and face the questions.